Hi.
My name is Jolene.
My name's Kevin, and we're the Saunders. And,
we are now.
Yeah. Just over 2 years married.
Mm-hmm.
And we just...
2.5 now.
I said just over, but yeah, closer to 2.5. But we just wanted to kind of just share our story and let people get to know us and how we ultimately let God lead our steps and to bring us together.
Mm-hmm. It's the best way.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, if you let God lead, He's always going to lead you down the most amazing path.
This is true. Unfortunately, I say unfortunately, but I learned a lot along the way. Unfortunately, I didn't always let God take the reins, and I dated some duds along the way. And I remember at one point I was writing a blog, and I was like, I've kissed a lot of... I've dated a lot of frogs and didn't want to kiss any of them because I was grossed out of it.
And and I was kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum in that I just decided I wasn't going to date anyone while I was in school, and I had just told God, if you have the right person for me, you're going to bring her into my life. And so
and it took you a while to finish school too, huh?
Yeah, it did.
Well, me too.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it was kind of cool. Like, I guess we'll just start in on our story. It was kind of cool. Like, we both, about a week before we went on our first date, we both had, in our own ways, made a declaration, just telling God that, we're fine if His will is that we be single the rest of our lives. We weren't going to push the issue, try to get into different relationships that necessarily wouldn't bring Him glory. So I had made that declaration. I had prayed it and said, but Lord, definitely, if you have the most perfect woman in the world for me that you've already handpicked,
tall order,
that I I would be ready and willing. But yeah.
So he didn't date, and I had just gotten so burned out of short-term nothings that I ended up deciding, you know what, forget about it. This is ridiculous. I'll just be single. It's better to be happy and single than miserable with the wrong person, which is very true. But I was becoming jaded, actually. I'd been a good, year and a half or so, and I had just been single, and I was realizing that I stopped believing the promises that God had had over me, that I had had through multiple people, proclaiming over me that God had a husband for me and children, in the works, obviously after getting married. And I stopped believing it, I think, at one point, and just started getting jaded. And I was like, would people stop asking if I'm single? Will they just stop with the, do you have a list? Oh, maybe your list is too hard, too much on your list. I mean, all these contradicting things, and I was just sick of it. And so I ended up writing a blog about how frustrated I had been, but then how I realized God did something in my heart. And I said, okay, God, if you do have someone for me, like I believe you've promised, I am going to wait patiently and not force it. But at the same time, I'm going to be happy and single until you do that. So it was just kind of a similar place that we got to.
Right. And God proved faithful. And he was like, thank you. Thank you for, putting essentially your life into my hands. That's what He asks for us, is to allow Him to take the reins, like Jillian said.
Total surrender. Yes,
total surrender. And it wasn't until we had both come to that point of total surrender that God was like, okay, you're ready. And soon after...
You want to say what happened?
Well, I'll start.
Actually, can I start?
Sure.
Okay, so I get this message. I'm a flight attendant, for anyone who doesn't know, and I was in Canada on an overnight. I believe this is Vancouver, BC. I was on an overnight, and in my hotel room, I get a Facebook message from an old friend, Caitlin, and in that message...
My sister.
I wasn't going to give that part away, but okay. It's his sister.
It's a cool part of the story.
I know I was going to wait, but you're good. We could tell it. We're telling it together. So Caitlin gives me this message and goes, hey, I just read your blog, and I just had somebody laid on my heart, and I felt like I'd love to set you up. And would you be willing to go on a double date, like a blind double date with my husband and I? And I was like, I don't know, Caitlin. And I think because I was kind of dragging my feet, because I was kind of like, I don't know if I want to go on a blind date. Been there, done that, not interested. And she goes, well, I'll just tell you because it's my brother. And I was like, little Kevin?
I had been a long-time friend of her brother's.
Since high school.
yeah. Since high school, by then it had been, I don't know, probably
13 years, I think.
Yeah, been friends about 13 years.
Yeah.
Still are best friends. So.
And so I'm just thinking in my head, my little brother's best friend? Really? I don't know about that. And I'm like, I honestly don't think he thinks of me as anything but a friend. And I've never put him in that box. He's always been in my brother's, friendship box. So I honestly wasn't sure what to make of it, but I'm like, you guys are an awesome family. I loved all my memories of hanging out with them, and I hadn't for a few years because I had moved away and was now back relatively in town. I was about an hour away, lived about an hour away at the time. And so I'm like, I'm close to back in town, and I'm like, I haven't seen you guys in a long time, so it'd be fun to just reconnect. Yeah, even if it's just, but don't don't get your hopes up. I don't want to expect anything to become of it,
Yeah, and before that, Caitlin had actually reached out to me and said, what about Jolene? And I was like, I do think she's beautiful. I had never even considered her because I thought of her more as a sister than not. Yeah,
I got that vibe from you.
she was the same class as my sister. So they were seniors while Curtis and I were freshman in high school. So definitely I saw Jolene as being more of a sister figure and older than me, which of course didn't play a part. Once we're both college age. It was amazing how 2 years 11 months just did not seem like that long.
It's true.
Of a big of a difference, I should say.
Once you're in your upper 20s, yeah.
Yeah. So and I was like, yeah, I would be open to that. Yeah. And so then that's when she reached out to Jolene.
Even so, we met then at Caitlin and her husband's house, initially for our double date, and ironically, they live next door. We live in a duplex with them now. So our first date was just a few feet away over there.
But at the time, though, I didn't live in this side, and Jolene still lived in Vancouver. And I still lived with my parents at that point because I was still finishing school. My parents were like, as long as you're still in school, we won't charge you rent. So I was still finishing up.
Well, once you finished up.
Yeah. So I was just finishing, and actually, I had already finished up that previous term. By the time we were dating, I was starting to think about moving out. I was starting to look and see what my options were. Yeah. I remember that first day. I was getting off work. I'm a grocer here in the Willamette Valley.
Manager.
Yeah. I remember coming to the house. I was really nervous. I was like, oh, is she going to remember me? Of course she would. But, these things were going through my head and come through the door. And I remember she was sitting facing away from the door. And so then she turned and her hair flicked. The sun was beaming through the window. It was like slow motion.
The story gets better every time you tell it. I love
it. And it was like I could hear an angelic chorus. It was just like, oh my word, wow, she is gorgeous. And and from then on, I had a feeling. I really had a feeling that she was the one. Yeah.
Yeah. When he walked in the door, he was still wearing his work uniform. And although he'd been working over a decade, honestly, for me, I seen you in that uniform. I was like, he works now. Oh, he's an adult. This is good. So it was good. He came in uniform. I'm like, my brain could kind of change. And I looked at him and I was like, he did grow up. He is an adult now and very good looking at that. So that went through my head as he walked in. Obviously, my first thought was, wow, he growed up. I still remember what I wore. Do you remember what you were? Oh yeah, duh. You were wearing uniform.
Right, I was in my work uniform, but I honestly that detail,
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember what you were wearing.
So we're in a blue top and blue jeans and cowgirl boots.
I do remember that now. Okay, you just had to give me a gentle
Yeah,
nudge.
it's funny. I think that date is just
us-
cemented in my mind.
Us guys are not as good with the fine details.
Like, remember how my hair was? How I did it? I'm just kidding.
Oh,
Well, not
goodness.
really.
But
So-
I just remember the bigger picture, like
Mhm.
how I was feeling when I came in, and
Yeah.
where Jolene was sitting, what way
Yeah.
she was looking. I remember that stuff. Yeah.
Well, and we should get to the part where we really started talking.
Yeah.
The two of us became literally the only people in the room,
Hmm.
literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
Because Caitlin and her husband then were like, we got to put the kids to bed as they meandered on. And we were thinking, boy, this is taking them forever to put the kids to bed. But I don't mind the time. We were really connecting. And truth be told, they were like in their room going, they're really hitting it off, aren't they? We can't get a word in edgewise.
We had so much more in common than we thought.
We
We
didn't
just
realize.
started just hitting it off.
Mhm.
Yeah, like we talked for, what would you say, maybe like an hour and a half straight? I feel
Long
like.
time. Yeah. I
Yeah.
don't even know. Long time.
Yeah, and we could have kept
Yeah.
talking, but of course it was getting later. It wasn't our house, either of our houses. So
It's true.
so then we started just making our way out. But
Really quick, can we say the first thing we bonded over? It's going to nerd us out, but
it was Star Trek.
he said something about where the location of something was. He goes, it was in this quadrant. And I was like, quadrant, like Star Trek? He was like, yeah. Do you watch Star Trek? I was like, grew up on it. Yeah.
Yeah, so then we started just talking about like, oh, so and so and so and so, and like, oh, we
Super
like
connection.
Voyager, and
Yeah.
yeah, and just started connecting over that, and
Our
then
love of
that
cats.
that led to our love of cats, then our love of sci-fi in general. So then Stargate SG-1 got brought up. It was just one
Yeah,
thing after another. That we were just like, wow, we had so
Mhm.
much more in common
All
than we
these
ever
years,
knew.
never knew.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So that was just incredible.
And then he walked me to my car by the end of this evening. And at this point, do you want to say what was going through your head or what you did?
So I was trying to think of a good way to ask her on another date, and I decided the best way would be to ask for her number again, even though I had her number at one point. But I had a legitimate excuse. My phone had recently been dropped in the rain. It completely died. All numbers were lost. So so I was like, hey, could I get your number again? I lost, and Jolene was like,
He's him hawing.
Yeah.
Like, it took him a while to spit this out. And he's like, for like dinner and a movie. I was like, oh, the intentions are suddenly clear. I'm like, what is taking him so long to spit out? Whatever he's going to spit out. And then once he did, I was like, oh my word. He was so direct. Like, some people might say, did you want to go for coffee? And it's like, I'm like, is that a date? Is it not? Like, he made it very clear. His intentions were very clear. And I was just like, I would have said yes, even if I didn't want to, because I was like, wow, so direct. So the guys these days could take a page out of your book. And not that I didn't want to, because I did. I was very much on board with the second date.
yeah. No, I knew, like I said, I knew, I had a feeling that she was the one. I wanted to keep growing our relationship. And so, yeah, it was our first, next day after that was Jungle Book. And then
When in theaters, the live action one was in theaters. Yeah.
live action one, and then dinner. It was
He made me
actually
dinner.
at my parents' because I was still living there. So,
Which I will interject. I had been on my own for a while. Mind you, I am older too, but I had been on my own, moved away for a while, and I was a little bit. Well, that was my one thing. I was like, is he going to be okay on his own? Like, he's never lived on his own yet. And obviously I was concerned for nothing, but I actually should have been happy that he had stayed there for so long. He led what's the word? A pure life, and he came into our relationship and was just so, honest, open, vulnerable, pure hearted, and just, yeah, I was amazed.
Well, I could say the same about Jolene. She came in just being so honest as well, and pure and faithful of heart, and just God-fearing and just incredible. And she didn't leave anything out. She told everything how it was, and I really love that about her. And I remember like it wasn't right away, but she did eventually start putting out some like questionnaires and stuff.
Oh, within a few weeks at least.
But it wasn't right away.
So not like the first day of double date.
Trying to just break the ice on certain like issues, harder issues,
hot
topics.
At this point in my dating relationships, I was like, I'm done with waiting to ask hard questions. I want to know, so we're not going to waste each other's time. So I started with easy questions. What's your favorite this and that? And, had to answer those. And and then I progressively got more probably uncomfortable questions even.
Yeah.
I don't know, to some degree. But
it was
easy
do you like
for
to
him.
drink? Do you want kids?
Are you a partier?
Yeah.
Do you want kids? How many?
Have a problem with pornography? Big issues that do need to be discussed and communicated to have a flourishing relationship.
Yeah, you need to know where each other stands on things. Yeah.
I feel like my observations of marriages that, or even just dating relationships that haven't survived, it's broken down over something that was never communicated in the earlier relationship that just tears the relationship apart.
And I was so impressed by his answers, because not only did he answer the questions posed, but I would email them to him because we lived an hour away. I would email them to him, and he would type up his answers, print out a hard copy, and bring it to our next dinner date so we could discuss them over dinner. I was like, oh, my heart. Oh, my goodness. I still have them to this day. His answers.
Really? I didn't know that.
I do.
Oh.
Of course I'm keeping those. They're our history. So, he was just answered in such godly answers. Like, his answers were honest and to the point, and just really showed me his heart. And I just could not have been more impressed, honestly. And so I remember sitting in my apartment with my roommate at the time, after I'm at my little laptop going, I need more questions. Because there's always a point where I break up with someone. I was the one who was like, okay, that's sorry, deal breaker. I'm sorry. We can't, this is one of my, things that we can't get past. And so I'm like, there's got to be more questions. Because I realized I was always looking for a way out, because I think because I deep down always knew too that it wasn't right. But with Kevin, it just never happened. And I'm like, I was sitting puzzling at my laptop going, there must be more questions, Katie. And she goes, you've asked him an awful lot of questions. Have you considered that there may not be any more questions to ask him? And I was like, oh my word, you're right. I don't think there's any more questions. I think he answered them all. What do I do? Where do we go from here? And I think at that point I was just like, okay, God, I give it to you. Wherever this leads, I'm open to see what where you take this.
Yeah, and it was a great time. We ended up deciding to get married earlier on in the relationship. We were like,
it's another story though.
Yeah, exactly. And both of our families were completely on board. Yeah. What
do you think it was? Was it like 6 months in, maybe? Yeah. Because we got married within a year. Yeah. Granted, we'd known each other like through my brother and your sister.
Right.
Since high school, but we had really only dated a year before we were tied the knot. It was under a year, under a year.
And meeting the parents, like that's always like the most like nervous thing for prospective like a boyfriend or girlfriend. But it wasn't in this case. We both knew each other's parents, so it's just like, hi.
I get to see you. It's been a while.
Granted, it was in a different context, but still. That was cool. So
no, it was fun. Well, and then obviously too, our parents, like my parents, loved him from the get-go, and
well, my parents loved her from the get-go. So.
Which honestly, that's one thing too. That was honestly one of my prerequisites, because I wanted and I prayed for somebody who my parents approved of, because my parents are godly people, and I wanted to have their godly blessing on whoever I married,
Right.
And I think you as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Most definitely. That was important.
And so having that, and honestly, I hadn't had that up until Kevin. So, which just goes to show.
Yeah.
Nobody else was right. But I was getting to the point where I was like, they're not going to be happy with anybody. That's what I had thought, but it wasn't true.
They were just protecting their one and only daughter.
This is true. Yeah. And you were your parents' last unmarried child. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because he was the youngest, I was the oldest.
Yeah.
Although my younger brother had gotten married before we did, obviously. Yeah. We were actually both in their wedding, my brother's wedding. And that was, 5 years before we had dated.
Right.
I believe. Yeah. Was it 4 or 5 years at that point?
Yeah, it was 4 going on 5 almost.
Okay. Yeah. Fair
Yeah.
enough. Mm-hmm. Since their wedding.
Yeah.
So I was going to say a few more things about where God gave us some confirmations along the way. And some of those confirmations, because that was one thing I had asked. God, if I am supposed to marry this person, like, I need to know that I know that I know that I know, because I don't want to be in a bad relationship, because I believe marriage is sacred and it's for the rest of your life. And you make a vow before God. And I wanted to have a relationship that lasted forever. On this earth forever. So so I really asked for, God, you got to confirm this to me so that I know and he knows. And there was just thing after thing. Backtrack to, it was either the day before or day after. I have it written. It's in the book. I can't remember. My mom had given me a book either the day before or day after our first double date. And I can't remember if it was the day before or day after. Regardless, it was almost on the day of that I had gone on this double date that she didn't know about, because, that wasn't anything to do with it or anything. I honestly didn't want to get my parents, hopes up at that point. And so had nothing to do with it. And this book, I was a little confused when I saw the title was called Praying for Your Husband from Head to Toe. And I'm like, Mom, I'm not married. And inside, I opened it up, and inside she'd written, I know it may seem odd to have a book about, praying for your husband, but honestly, Jolene, this is the greatest gift you could give to your husband, is to pray for him. And so she's like, whether that's, a week from now or a year from now, oh, that's crazy. It was a year from then. Come to think of it, and she had written that in the book, and which is so cool to think about in retrospect. So I started reading it. I'm like, that's true. That is a great gift I could give my future husband, whoever he is. And so in it, it's an awesome book for you ladies if you want to read it. It really was cool, and I've read it again since, And it has scriptural reference, and then it has like a guided prayer through it. So, specifically praying for each part of him, and like head to toe, literally from head to toe, just praying for your husband. And so I would go through those. And so when I would get to the prayer part, I would read, pray for my husband, all this thing. And then several months into our relationship, I started realizing that I had started inserting Kevin's name without realizing it. And then pray for Kevin this and pray for Kevin that. And I was just like, oh, and I can remember once we were engaged, I was like, when did my mom give me that book? And so I went back and looked at the date, and I was like, wow, that timing could not have been anything but God. So that was pretty cool. We have a prophetic friend as well, family friend, who I also wanted to kind of get a blessing from her without her knowing what was going on too.
Right.
But we had actually had our first argument right before I called her, the day before I called her. And we had been, at this point, we weren't actually engaged yet, but we had been making preparations, like pretty much planning our wedding. We just weren't engaged yet. And I called her, and I was actually really emotionally feeling like, oh no, it turned out to be nothing. Like, it was ridiculous. The whole argument ended up being nothing. I didn't know it at the time, and it was our first, disagreement, or so we thought. And the first thing she said on the phone, because I called her on the phone, and she goes, I don't know what you're doing, but the Lord says whatever you're planning is good. Don't stop. Whatever you're planning, it's good, and God is blessing it. And then she goes on to say she saw me in a white dress. So I was like,
right.
Okay, that couldn't have been more clear. She didn't even know I was dating anyone. And so then we had gone, and actually before I think we were engaged at this point, weren't we? When we went and saw her, and just to get prayer from her.
Right.
And I remember she had said a lot of really encouraging things and stuff, and that, God had his stamp of approval on him, which was awesome. And then on top of that, something really cool. Do you want to say about the ladder?
Oh yeah. She had seen like God saying that I was gonna be moving up the ladder where I was working. That God was blessing that
they were just
work
gonna,
for me, and that they were just gonna just keep moving me up. And it sounded like in a quick fashion, quicker than I would ever expect. And then within this last year, it was a year later. Within a matter of like 6 months, I got 2 promotions.
Yeah. Just back to back. I was like, isn't there like a certain amount of time you have to be in one position before being promoted to the next? But boom, he was in upper management just like that.
It was incredible. It was like, wow.
Yeah.
When God says he's going to do something, he's going to do it.
Well, and he had said to her that you wouldn't have to apply for these positions, but they were just going to move you up. God was just going to promote him. And sure enough,
and that's exactly how those later positions are, that you are handpicked. So.
And he was. So it's been awesome, seeing those come to fruition, just little nuggets of confirmation, even just for us. Yeah. And so that was really cool. There was I feel like there was a third really cool confirmation. And this was kind of a random, totally random, but it was totally God. Okay, it seems totally random, but it wasn't, right? So we were discussing music for our wedding. We're engaged at this point, right? Or were we? We weren't even engaged, were we?
Not yet.
We started planning our wedding before he proposed.
Well, part of that was because we were waiting for the ring. The ring, it was taking a while longer for it to get done because they had to specially size it for Jolene's fingers.
And I think you said months, right?
Yeah, it took months.
Waiting months
because they actually had to essentially remake it. Because the ring was already at like the smallest that they could get it in its current state, so then they had to take the diamonds out and
there's a lot of little diamonds.
Yeah, exactly. So and then
it took a while.
So it did. So I was waiting until I actually had the ring to ask, but then we knew that we were going to get married. So then that's where we were starting. Yeah.
So at this point, we're talking about music. And earlier this day, I had been talking to my dad, and I'm a violinist, and I've played at a lot of weddings over the years. And my dad was saying, you should do Pachelbel's Canon for the processional. And I was like, oh, I don't know. I've played that at so many weddings. And I'm just like, I don't know if I want traditional wedding music at my wedding. I've played it all. I'm probably tired of it still. I got to a point where I was like, no traditional wedding music. I don't want it. I've heard it a million times. I've played it a million times. I'm done with it. And he puts it up on his phone on YouTube, and so that I could hear it again, because it is a very beautiful piece. And I go, out of my mouth comes, the only person I'd want playing that is Valerie Nelson, and I haven't talked to her in a really long time. She was my high school director's daughter, and she was an amazing violinist. Last I had heard, she had been going on to study to be professional in music and get a degree in music performance, and she now has her doctorate in music performance. And I hadn't talked to her in what turns out to be 11 years. I hadn't talked to her. And
we should say how you figured out that it was 11 years.
I will. But that evening, I was going to say, we met for a dinner date, and we were discussing this, and I told him what my dad had said, and he's like, reach out to her, ask her. And I'm like, no, it'd be so awkward to be like, hey, I haven't talked to you in so long, but do you want to play at my wedding? That'd just be weird. And I'm like, I can't do it. I just can't be that person. I just would feel too weird, and I couldn't do it. So we're like, okay. He's like, he didn't push it then, and went to sleep that night. And I woke up the next morning, pull out my phone, and I see a Facebook message from Valerie Nelson. And sure enough, she randomly says, hey, Facebook reminded me that this picture of us was from 11 years ago. And that was the last time we had seen each other on a orchestra trip to Europe. It's making you sleepy. And orchestra trip to Europe, and she goes, I can't believe that was 11 years ago. How are you? How's life? What's new? And I was like, ooh, maybe I should mention. So I did, and of course she was more than happy to play. And a week later, at Kevin's store at the time.
Oh yeah, her dad was shopping, and I mentioned that that Jolene was going to and I were going to be getting married, and that his daughter was playing at our wedding, and he was like, "Wait, Jolene Lutke?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, soon to be Saunders," but I was like, "Yeah, we're getting married May 13th," and he was like, "Oh, I'll reach out to Valerie, and I'd love to play in the wedding too, and we could do a duet, so we could have like the harmonies and everything." And I was like, "Oh my word, that would be great!" And so so then he reached out, and Valerie and him, they practiced and then came together and came and played at our wedding together.
Awesome.
So we had her old orchestra director as well as a longtime friend of hers, also from orchestra, father-daughter duet. Yeah.
It was so cool. Just one thing after another. God was just making a way and blessing us through the whole process. I mean, people were like volunteering practically, I feel like, for like the flowers and the cake and just like, oh, we'll do this, we'll do that. I'm just like, I was blown away.
Boom, 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 boom.
One thing after another fell into place. Even the dates was just God ordained because I had already had vacation for those dates, and it was just like, oh, well, that works out perfectly to have, the 6 month engagement, and then so it just was. Yeah, it just shows that when God's in the picture, everything gels perfectly. Yeah, and just falls in place. Yeah. So we have been married now, and we're still happily married. Still feels like a honeymoon. Yeah, I in my perspective, the honeymoon never ends. He's so sweet. Yeah, I know there's like the phrase is used like for that first time, being together for. Well, I guess nowadays it is extended to like the first year, but a lot of times it's more loosely just used like with just that first time together after the wedding. But it's amazing every day coming home to Jolene. Yeah, this is still the honeymoon. It is. Yeah. Well, he's amazing. He's just the most sweet, servant-hearted, like tender-hearted, caring person I have ever known. Like by far, he's amazing. Hey, ditto. Jolene's amazing. She's so tender-hearted, caring, loving, supportive. Yeah, the list could go on forever. Blessed, and we just want to encourage everybody that if hasn't happened yet, God's got someone, and to just be patient. And God's got someone out there for you. Listen to his leading, listen to his voice, and just be patient and wait for that person, because it's better than I could have ever imagined. Right. Well worth the wait. Well worth it. All right. Hey, God bless you all. Bye. Bye.